All right, this is section 9.3. We are going to begin to solve quadratics with another method called using square roots. So up until now, all we've done is factoring. So we're going to start focusing on reviewing what we've already done in example 1 because sometimes it'll work and sometimes it won't. So look at this first example, x squared minus 3x minus 10 equals 0. So the two numbers that multiply to give you negative 10 and add to give you negative 3 are negative 5 and positive 2. So it's x minus 5 and x plus 2 equals 0. Then remember you split it into two equations. You have x minus 5 equals 0 or x plus 2 equals 0. And that is why x is equal to 5 or negative 2 when you solve. Now this one does not work solving by factoring because there is nothing that multiplies to give you 1 and adds to give you 10. It just doesn't work. Okay, so this one you could not solve by factoring because there's no two numbers that you could put there to make it work. Okay, so let's look at A, B, and C. We're going to try to factor these to see if we can. So what multiplies to negative 22 and adds to negative 9? Well, that's going to be negative 11 and positive 2. So this is x minus 11 and x plus 2 is equal to 0. When you solve, you have x minus 11 equals 0, so x is positive 11. And x plus 2 equals 0, which means x is negative 2. So remember, we have two answers most of the time when we solve via factoring. B, remember, it has to be equal to 0 in order to factor. So my first step is to get that negative 12 to the other side to make it positive 12. So what multiplies to 12 and adds to 7? That's 3 and 4. So this is x plus 3 and x plus 4 equals 0. Break up your equations. So x is negative 3 and x is negative 4. Once again, that one has two solutions. All right, C. A is not 1, so we got to be careful here. We got to multiply to A times C. So you got to multiply to 6 and add to 7. So this is 6 and 1. But remember, you can't just plug in 6 and 1 because you need 2x and x. So if I want this outside term, so this is going to be plus 3. That gives me my 6x. 2x times 3 is 6x. And then this can just be 1. Still equal to 0. 2x plus 1 equals 0. X plus 3 equals 0. So this is negative 1/2 and negative 3, my two solutions. All right, now we're going to move on to the new method of today. Everything I just did is something you have learned before, but section 9.3 has to do with solving by square roots. You'll also see it called isolating x, okay? The big thing to remember here, this method only works when x has one appearance in the quadratic. If x appears more than once, it's not going to work. Okay, so make sure you see that. So right here, x appears, I'm going to try to use my highlighter, x only appears one time. That's not working. I'll underline it. Okay, over here, x appears twice. So you cannot isolate when x appears twice in an equation. Okay, so isolate means to get by itself. Okay, so my first step on this example was I moved 3 to the other side. That's where 32 came from. Then I divided by 2. That's where 16 came from. And then how do you undo something squared? You take the square root. So the square root of x squared is x, and the square root of 16 is plus or minus 4. Got to be super careful there that you don't forget one of the two answers, because negative 4 times negative 4 is 16, and 4 times 4 is also 16. So the square root of a positive number will always have two answers. We're going to talk a little bit more about that here in just a second. So let's look at A. Once again, to get x squared by itself, you need to move 49 to the other side. So x squared equals positive 49. How do you undo something squared? You take the square root. The square root of 49 is plus or minus 7. So that one was pretty straightforward. B, move over the 24. So it becomes positive 24. So you have 4x squared equals 24. Then you have to divide both sides by 4. So x squared is 24 divided by 4, which is 6. I think. Yes. And then to solve, take the square root of both sides. So x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 6. Now you will notice that's not a perfectly perfect answer. This answer was a whole number, which really means over here that you could have factored, but solving by isolating will still get you the right answer. This one you could not have factored. I'm talking about B right now. This one is not factorable because you don't end with a whole number right here, okay? Now, the square root of 6 you learned in section 9.1 is really the square root of 4 times the square root of 2, which is x is equal to plus or minus 2 root 2, okay? Leaving that answer, the square root of 6, is like leaving 3/6 as your fraction. You have to simplify, okay? If you have a square root that can be simplified, you must do that in your final answer. So B is x is equal to plus or minus 2 root 2. Change colors here. Let's look at C. Once again, move 84 to the other side. Move negative 84 to the other side, so it becomes positive 84. 2x squared is 84. To get x squared to isolate, to get it by itself, you've got to divide both sides by 2. 84 divided by 2 is 42. Once again, that's not a perfect square, so x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 42 when you take the square root of both sides. And then you've got to think of the biggest perfect square that goes into that. So 36 doesn't, 25 doesn't, 16 does not, 9 does not, 4 does, doesn't it? No. Maybe that's simplified. So when that happens, that nothing can be simplified, you're done. X is equal to plus or minus the square root of 42. All right, let's look at D. D, we need to start by adding 12. So I have negative x squared is equal to negative 12 plus 12, which is 0. You've got this negative here, so I need to divide by negative 1. And 0 divided by negative 1 is just 0. So x squared is equal to 0. Taking the square root of both sides, x is equal to, now originally we do plus or minus 0. You can't have a negative 0. So x is just equal to 0. So this equation, super duper duper important. When you go to solve and it is equal to 0, it only has one solution. You're going to see this pop up on IXL. When something is equal to 0 right here, okay, it only has one solution, whereas these have two, the plus or minus. Okay, so make sure you are paying attention to that. Really liking all my color choices over here. Part E, subtract 16. Try to isolate x. We have negative 2x squared equals 16 minus 16, which is 0. Once again, dividing by negative 2, x squared is equal to 0, which means x is equal to 0, and you only have, go back to my blue, you only have one solution on letter E. And let's try F. Subtract 49 from both sides. You have 81x squared equals negative 24 minus 49, which is negative, don't have a calculator in front of me, 73, I believe. Dividing both sides by 81 gives you x squared equals negative 73 over 81. Now, I can actually stop right here. And the reason I can stop right here is because of this negative number. Okay, if you go to take the square root of both sides and you're taking the square root of a negative number, your calculator is going to give you an error because that is not a real number. Okay, so this one actually has no real solutions. We say no real solutions because there's something called an imaginary number that you will learn about in high school. Okay, but for right now, this has no real solutions because when you went to solve, you were going to have to take the square root of a negative number, and you cannot do that. All right, one more application problem. A person sitting in the top row of the bleachers at a sporting event drops a pair of sunglasses from a height of 24 feet. You all know I love to draw pictures. So here I am drawing my picture. So they dropped the sunglasses from a height of 24 feet. And the function, negative 16x squared plus 24, represents the height. How long does it take for the sunglasses to hit the ground? They're hitting the ground over here. So we're trying to find a 0, which means you're going to set the height equal to 0. So 0 equals negative 16x squared plus 24. Subtract 24 from both sides. So I have negative 24 equals negative 16x squared. Now, some of you are going to want to stop there because you're like, oh, I see a negative number. You can't do that because when I divide both sides by negative 16 to get x by itself, a negative divided by a negative becomes a positive. So x squared is actually positive 24 over 16, which I'm sure simplifies to something nice and neat. Let me get a calculator. Simplifies to 3 over 2, which is 1.5. So x squared equals 1.5 seconds. So when you take the square root of both of those, x is equal to, equal, if you're going to use a decimal, you really should say approximately, which is that squiggly line, which is approximately 1.22 seconds. Now, the reason I don't have plus or minus 1.22 seconds is because if you look at my picture over here, that negative's over there and that doesn't really exist. Now, you could have used radicals over here. You could have kept this the square root of 24 over the square root of 16. You could have split them and simplified them because this is 4. And the square root of 24 breaks down to 2 root 6. Not 2 root 6. That's right. I should have trusted myself. And while I realized that this was right, as my dog comes running in, I hope you can hear his jingle. While I was realizing this was right, I realized this was wrong. So if you caught my error on B, it should have just ended as x equals plus or minus root 6, because 4 times 2 is 8. 4 times 2 is not 6. And this is why I should go back to school, because this quarantine is making me a little crazy. So that is it for 9.3. Check Canvas for your assignment for today. Have a good one.